Hey, wrestling fans. Brian Solomon here, contributing writer for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, with another of our video editorials. And what I'd like to talk about today is something that was kind of making the rounds on Twitter the other day, which kind of started from comments that were made by Bret Hart about talking about Hulk Hogan and how his style of working was just that Bret sort of considered to be inferior to his own style of working, the more technical style of working. And it sort of sparked a whole conversation on there and over whether or not technical wrestlers are superior or if Bret Hart was a better wrestler than Hulk Hogan. And it got me thinking, and I want to point out, I don't think that Bret Hart was essentially saying that Hulk Hogan was terrible. I think Bret Hart was saying that Hulk Hogan was a very different kind of performer than he was. But a lot of sort of his followers and maybe people on Twitter took it to another level, kind of saying that Hulk Hogan was terrible and Bret Hart was much better. And by extension, technical wrestlers are better than the kind of wrestlers that, say, Bret Hart is or was. And I kind of wanted to raise some disagreement about that because I think something that we're forgetting here is that it's really all working, right? I mean, when it comes down to it, none of these guys are actually wrestling. And I know that's blasphemous to say, but they're not. They're performing. There's different ways to perform. And in my opinion, anyway, the technical style of performing is no better than any other style. It's no less of a work than any other style. Now, I want to point out, I'm not trying to say that it's not more athletic. I would say that technical wrestlers, people that use the technical style, are more athletic, generally speaking, than ones that don't. But I don't think that that makes you a better pro wrestler, the fact that you are performing in a less athletic style. Working is working. Everything is working. They both are excellent, in my opinion. And I'm not talking about as human beings here, but I'm talking about as performers. Bret Hart was an elite level performer. So was Hulk Hogan, just in very different ways. Now, my personal preference as a performer and as a person is Bret Hart, but that doesn't mean that Hulk Hogan was a terrible or inferior performer. What he did in the ring was, in my estimation, brilliant. The way that he could control a crowd, the way he could make them feel emotions, the way he could be so minimalistic and sell things by doing less. There's a certain brilliance to that and an it factor that I don't think you can discount. He once told me in an interview I did with him how, guys like Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio and Dean Malenko and all of them, they had to work so much harder to get the same kind of reaction in the ring that he gets just by doing that. And I couldn't really fault him on that. I think people sometimes don't realize that technical wrestling, quote unquote, is not necessarily a real thing. It's part of the fictional presentation of pro wrestling. It's sort of like wrestling's last true illusion. So while there are some technical wrestlers who can shoot wrestle, many of them can't. And even the ones who can are not really doing it in the ring, right? They're performing. And I think it's important to remember that. So, like, for example, if I could give a different analogy besides Hulk Hogan, like, let's say somebody like Bruiser Brody, right? Bruiser Brody was a brawler, and he's generally considered probably the greatest practitioner of the brawling style. He was excellent in the ring. But are we going to say that just because he was a brawler then, that he's inferior as a pro wrestler to, people like Bret Hart, Kurt Hennig, Ricky Steamboat, Bob Orton, people that were known for being technicians? I don't know if I'm willing to say that. I mean, you might say that one is a better worker than another for different reasons, but I don't think that the style is what makes them inferior. Like, take somebody like Dusty Rhodes. You can say all you want. No one in the world is ever going to accuse Dusty Rhodes, the great Dusty Rhodes, of having been an amazing scientific wrestler. But what he was probably the greatest babyface of all time, or very high on the list. So that's what I mean when I say everything is working, right? Flying all over the ring, doing all kinds of takedowns, reversals, and all this technique, that's working. But so is playing to a crowd. So are facials. So is stepping out of the ring and stalling so that everybody in the arena wants to set you on fire because they hate you so much. All that stuff that you're doing in the ring is working. It's part of working. And so I think sometimes we do wrestling a disservice when we come out there and we say, well, technical wrestlers, so-called, are superior to all other kinds of wrestling. I think we have to remember that technical wrestling is a performance style, and that these guys are not actually wrestling at the end of the day. I know it sounds silly to have to point that out, but I think sometimes it's forgotten. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the whole Bret Hart, Hulk Hogan issue. I think they're both brilliant. My own preference is Bret Hart, but I do think that Hulk Hogan in his own way and wrestlers like him are just as incredible and just as great of workers as the technicians are. So again, this has been Brian Solomon, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and I hope you enjoyed listening to my video editorial. So long, wrestling fans.